These maps suck. Hey everyone, I'm Hoodie Angel Brandon. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been really into Fire Emblem lately. Like, I won't shut up about it. Anyway, as a result, I thought it was about time to take a look at another full-fledged Fire Emblem game in a non-mobile game summoning video. Because, boy do I sure do a lot of those. Oops. Since I personally started with the modern games in the series, and then went back and looked at an older game, I thought as something a little bit different, we'd take a look at an old game that's been brought into the modern era, with today's game, Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia. Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia is a 3DS remake of Fire Emblem Gaiden. Gaiden is the second installment in the Fire Emblem series. While still a turn-based tactical RPG like its predecessor, Gaiden had many unique elements like dungeon exploration. Its remake honors this and brings back things like this and mages casting spells not with tomes but using HP, making it a similar but distinct game from others in the series. In this regard, it reminds me a lot of Zelda 2: Adventure of Link. Anyway, let's move on and talk about Shadows of Valentia in particular. Two gods, the siblings Duma and Milla, founded the continent of Valentia. However, they disagreed about how to lead their people. Milla believed man should have easy, peaceful lives, while her brother believed man should be ruled harshly. Their differing beliefs led them to feud and eventually split Valentia, each leading one side. To the north, Duma led the people of Rigel to become a mighty people, while Milla gave the people of Zofia in the south her blessing, allowing many crops to grow. The two led their people separately, vowing never to interfere with one another. This all changed when the Rigelian Empire broke the Divine Accord and attempted to take control of Zofia. To reclaim control of their homeland, a group of Zofians known as the Deliverance spring up to fight Rigel's control. And all the while, the blessing of the Earth Mother has faded, furthering the problems for the people of Zofia. To save the land, two children of prophecy, each bearing a mark, must fulfill their destinies. These are the game's two protagonists, Alm and Celica. Alm is a village boy, trained to fight from a young age by his grandfather Mycen, a former knight. Having never left his village, he wants to explore the world outside and jumps at the chance to join the Deliverance, and help fight against Rigel. He has a strong desire to help those suffering, furthering his drive to fight on behalf of the people of Zofia. Celica is a young woman raised in a priory, a devoted priestess of the Earth Mother. At the start of the game, she leaves to find the reason behind the fading of Milla's blessing. She detests violence and, due to being raised in a priory for most of her life, lacks world experience and is prone to making some questionable decisions. She's a bit too trusting. The two each move on their respective paths and are accompanied by various allies. A lot of the supporting cast is interesting, with villagers like Gray and Tobin who have great banter between them, the mercenary Saber, who actually has some much needed world experience and who Celica should really listen to, the energetic May, and everyone's favorite yandere, Faye. Okay, maybe not favorite, but man, her thirst for Alm is unreal. For the most part, the supporting cast is great. I enjoy them more than our protagonists, though like Sacred Stones and unlike Fates and Awakening, you can't just go nuts and support everyone with everyone. The options are a lot more limited here. It's unfortunate, cause I'd love to see more of these characters, and see them fleshed out just a bit more. Also, as you probably noticed, there's no avatar character for you to marry your favorite character to. We single this time. I'm actually okay with them staying true to the original game and not trying to shoehorn these mechanics in. With that said, sometimes sticking too close to the original can cause problems, but I'll explain more on that later. The story is pretty good, but there were some things I took issue with. For example, it goes on about how you don't need to be special to make change on Alm's route, but he's got the special brand of destiny, so throw that moral out the window. Nothing major, and I don't expect it to be perfect, unlike some fans of the series where they constantly hate on Fates because it's not freaking Shakespeare. Anyway, ranting aside, let's move on. The art style in this game is great. Character portraits look wonderful and have personality to them. In particular, May and Delphia stuck out to me. Map sprites also look quite good, and the way the battle menu is presented just looks really clean and easy to read. It's probably my favorite, which is a weird thing to say, but it's true. I just really like this game's battle menu. Also, of the 3DS games, I think this game's battle models are the most polished, though I haven't exactly done a side-by-side comparison or anything. With that said, I don't love everything about the game's visual presentation. Critical cut-ins didn't feel as exciting as in Fates and Awakening, though that's more preference than anything. I think I just don't like how the portraits take up so much of the screen instead of being off to the side. It really kind of interferes with the actual action of the characters doing their thing. I think this is the only thing about the graphical presentation I just really don't like. On the sound front, things are likewise mostly good. All dialogue by major characters and even several minor ones are voiced, which is awesome. I really love this and hope they carried over for the next game. There are also lots of great music tracks as well, from Alm's map theme, Milla's Divine Protection, and Twilight of the Gods. Particularly, the ending credits theme, The Heritors of Arcadia, is a beautiful piece. With that said, I feel like it could use a bit more variety. I'd assume this is due to wanting to stick to mostly having the same tracks from the original game play on their corresponding map, so it makes sense. I just personally think they could have stood to be a little bit more lenient here. Overall, I'd say this game is presented quite well, with just a few things that could be improved upon. Finally, let's talk about the way this game plays. Being at least something of an experienced player at this point, I decided to start on Hard Classic, which is the highest difficulty available at start. I'm not really sure why they didn't include Lunatic from the start, which I'd imagine is frustrating for people who are actually good at this and want a real challenge. Although, I ended up being kinda not good enough for that level of challenge. Whoops. There's a mechanic called Milla's Turn Wheel, which lets you rewind the battle and save units who die, which I ended up using a lot towards the second half of the game. Hey, I never claimed to be actually good at Fire Emblem. At least I don't have to use Phoenix mode in Fates, so that's something, right? Speaking of difficulty, the AI seems smarter, knowing when to retreat and such. Anyway, the game proper has you controlling both Alm and Celica and their respective armies. The first chapter has you play as Alm, the second is Celica, and from there on you can swap between the two on the main map freely. Occasionally enemies will spawn on the map and move around, and when you move one character, an enemy by the other may attack them, forcing you into fights you don't want, which is beyond obnoxious as you try and move one character to a specific location and keep getting dragged into fights with the other character. The actual battles, though, are the familiar Fire Emblem turn-based tactical style you know and love. Wait, what is this? Why is everything different? Remember how I said this game reminds me of Zelda 2? That's because it has a lot of mechanics that make it stick out compared to other games in the franchise. Though I'd say this is a bit more recognizably Fire Emblem than that game is Zelda. First is one change I already mentioned, and that's magic based off HP. In other Fire Emblem games, mages use tomes to attack, swapping between them to use various different kinds of attacks. Here, as they level up, your mages will learn various spells. When they attack, they can cast spells from their spell list by paying HP rather than swapping to a specific tome. I actually like this, as it allows a lot of flexibility, while still giving a bit of a cost to compensate, whereas melee characters can't just freely swap between 5 different weapons. Speaking of which, weapons available to use are tied to specific classes as usual, but it's a bit more limited here. For example, armored units and paladins can only equip lances, unlike other games where they'll have the option to add axes or swords. In fact, axes aren't even usable in this game, yet there are a few you can find. I don't know why. I kept waiting for an axe user to show up, so they just sat there collecting dust in my inventory. Having items that exist just for selling is common in games, but you don't make it a weapon you can traditionally use. That's just confusing. And further, with no axes, the traditional Fire Emblem weapon triangle doesn't exist here. Somewhere, a very adept Roy is crying. I take back what I said, this game is in no way recognizably Fire Emblem. Truly, it is the Zelda 2 of Fire Emblem. At least bows can be used from a greater range, up to 6 spaces compared to the usual 2 in other games. For once, my favorite weapon is actually useful! Unlike other games where you can carry 5 items on a unit, in this the limit is 1 item only per character, but having it equipped can let you learn special skills. This also applies to healing items though, so you can't just load a tank up with a bunch of different healing items and steamroll. These special skills are called arts, and the way arts can be chosen from adds a nice layer of strategy. Sometimes it's best to use a skill like hit and run to do chip damage while evading. Others it's best to attack normally and try and get the kill. It also gives some flexibility for melee units akin to what mages have, though generally not as OP. I say generally because Double Lion is just about the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. These weapons and accessories also don't have durability, much like the weapons in Fates. When it comes time to promote your units, it works a bit differently from other games, where specific items were needed. Here, you just need to get a unit to a certain level and then take them to a Shrine of Milla. Promotions are on a class-by-class basis in terms of levels, which is a bit weird. Myrmidons promote at level 10, and mages at level 12 unless they're female, in which case they have to be level 14. What? I prefer the old way of doing it, where you know exactly when you can promote. Here it's just kinda... I do like how you don't need a specific item here though, that's great. Finally, with basic mechanics out of the way, let's talk about my least favorite part of the game. That's right, the maps. Maps are really basic and boring. I pretty much just turtled through the game. A lot of the maps are just a giant field with some trees and maybe a river plopped down through the middle, which wasn't very fun. There weren't really checkpoints to hold or anything like that. In fact, it really made me appreciate the maps in Sacred Stones in retrospect, which were large and interesting. Now that's not to say all the maps are bad, there are a good number of interesting ones like Fear Mountain and the Sluice Gate. It's just that the ones that stick out the most as bad happen to be repeated the most, especially the in-dungeon maps. That they kind of overwrite any memory of a good one. The map conditions are boring too. Route the enemy, route the enemy, route the enemy.
Boring, don't you think?
I think there are like 2 total maps that aren't route the enemy, and those are defeat the boss maps. But the way they're set up, you'll probably end up routing the enemy anyway. Also, on a semi-related note, I feel like a lot of the difficulty comes from just constant enemy reinforcements. Screw Cantors. These guys just summon tons of enemies, which aren't usually that threatening until endgame, where you've got ones that can multiply. Suddenly you risk being overrun, and in the early game, it's just obnoxious. A map that should take maybe 30 minutes suddenly takes 2 hours just because of these guys. That's not clever design. Make the fights hard because of smart enemy placement with good weapons, not just swarming the player and hoping to get a cheap kill. I know these are more problems as a result of it being a remake, but I feel like they're fair complaints because it affects how fun it is to actually play. And I mean, they changed something, like the way the fight with Jedha functions, or the introduction of Milla's turn wheel, to be slightly more player friendly. And if you're going to go to the trouble of adding new characters like Faye and Berkut in an effort to develop the world more, how about literally developing the world more? Add more to the freaking terrain! Ponds and lakes units have to go around, rivers that do more than go in a straight line, more choke points so armors feel useful, etc. I'm sure they could have made some improvements to other things while still keeping to the original spirit of the game. I mean, I'm asking for improved maps and enemy layouts. I'm not asking that they overhaul the game to fit in the Fates and Awakening waifu mechanic. I know I'm really harping on it, but the maps are just so bland, and I think good maps are important to the strategy aspect of a Fire Emblem game. There are some fun strategies you can use, like warp, to send a unit to a boss or other troublesome enemy, attacking, and then having another unit use rescue to pull the fighter out of danger. This is great for assassinating enemy cantors that won't stop spawning enemy reinforcements and preventing my army from advancing. Yeah, Alm's Double Lion, Silk's Warp, and Faye's Rescue makes a nice combo, so it's not all turtling. Finally, as mentioned earlier, this game, like the original Gaiden, has dungeons that you can explore. You do so in third person, moving either Alm or Celica throughout the dungeon, breaking obstacles and either fighting or avoiding enemies, which when touched lead you into battle. If you attack the enemy, they'll start the battle weakened, and if they hit you from behind, they get the first turn, which is a nice touch. This is where some of the game's blandest maps come from though. Some of the dungeons can be a bit long and slows the game down to a crawl. This is where the last big mechanic becomes apparent, the fatigue system. As a unit battles, they grow tired, which will have a negative impact on their stats. It can be alleviated by either having that unit eat or by making an offering to a statue of Milla. Most battles, this isn't really a problem since they'll be done before you really notice, and it's reset once you return to the main map. In dungeons though, where you're doing back-to-back battles, it can become a problem. Most dungeons have a statue placed conveniently enough that this isn't a big deal, but it is something to keep in mind. I actually kind of like this mechanic, as it means you can't just steamroll with a few overpowered units and makes it more rewarding to have multiple trained. Finally, let's close things out with my final thoughts. While I haven't played the original game that this game is based on, Fire Emblem Gaiden, it seems like a fairly accurate remake, staying true to the source material for the most part, for better or worse. The game itself is gorgeous in terms of presentation, and the various mechanics, while a bit weird, do give it a unique feel, which I'm glad wasn't changed for this remake. It did flesh out the story and characters from its base game. I feel like it could have gone just a bit further with the characters though. With that said, they did change those things, so I think they could have tweaked some of the maps while still staying true to the spirit of the original game. If you're not going to iron out the problems present in the original, why bother remaking it beyond just adding pretty new graphics? That aside, the game is still mostly fun to play, and one I do recommend to fans of the series, particularly ones who'd like to try something a little bit different, but still recognizably Fire Emblem. Though I don't think it's one that I'll be in a rush to revisit compared to the other 3DS games in the series. So that's Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia. There's a lot I liked, and a fair bit I didn't, which just kinda averages out in the end. Personally, I'd love to see more Echoes-styled remakes of older games in the series in the future. Hopefully ones with better freaking map design.